So in this particular video, we are going to be talking a little bit about something called the threshold potential. Okay, it's a little bit of a new concept, but it's also tied into your depolarization and repolarization anyway. Now, before we talk about the threshold potential, I want to give you a situation right here. Situation over here is as follows. I'm just drawing out two hands over here, and the purple color line is just the axon of a neuron, okay? And of course, the axon over here, both the axons have a resting membrane potential of negative 70 millivolts. Now, on the situation on the right, someone taps on your wrist and someone touches your wrist quite strongly, and therefore that's a strong stimulus. And the situation on the left over there, let's for example say a tiny little ant is just walking on your wrist and it's a weak stimulus. Now, I'm going to ask you a very simple question, okay? Let's say you close your eyes and someone taps your wrist. Are you able to feel it? Yes. But if you close your eyes and an ant, a small little ant, a very tiny ant by the way, is just walking on your wrist, are you able to feel the ant, walking on your wrist? The answer is probably not. How is that possible? Because the ant is stepping on your skin, so it's a stimulus. But why aren't you able to feel it? So, to answer this question, now some students will say, well, the tapping on the wrist is a strong stimulus, and the tiny ant walking on the wrist is a weak stimulus. So that's it. And of course, you will be right. Okay, a strong stimulus is able to depolarize the axon, which creates a membrane potential of positive 30 millivolts, and therefore this generates an action potential. And therefore, the action potential is sent to the brain, and then your brain says, hey, someone is tapping on your wrist. That's fine. But for the ant, however, yes, it's stimulating your skin, but the membrane did not successfully depolarize. So it did not generate an action potential. So were there any signals sent to the brain? No, there were no signals sent to the brain in this case. So you did not feel the ant on your skin. Now, immediately I'll ask my students the question, is this a good or bad thing? Some students will say it's bad because we want to feel everything. But some students will say, no, it's good because, a tiny ant walking on your skin is not an extremely important stimulus. So it's good to not generate action potential sometimes because in this case, you can save ATP. You conserve more ATP in that case. You don't want to be able to detect everything. For example, imagine if you're sleeping and a small little insect just crawled on your leg. Do you want to wake up from that? No, you don't. Okay, the body has to go through this period where it has to notice that some stimulus are just not so important to generate the action potential. So the question is, how does the body do this? How does the body control what stimulus generates action potentials and what stimulus don't? So this is where we have to talk about something called the threshold potential. As you can see over here, I'm just drawing out the axon, and the green colored dots are just, for example, these sodium ion channels. Okay, yes, I know I usually I'm supposed to represent the sodium ion channels as orange color, but let's just call it green color in this case. I made a slight mistake. So remember, when it's maintaining a resting membrane potential, there is a low sodium ion concentration inside the axon and a higher sodium ion concentration outside the axon. This will maintain the resting membrane potential of about negative 70 millivolts. Now, for example, a weak stimulus is inflicted upon the skin, the receptor, and this weak stimulus over here, I just want you to see what happens to the voltage-gated sodium ion channels. Look at how many voltage-gated sodium ion channels open over there. Only one voltage-gated sodium ion channel opens in this case. So you might be thinking, oh, that's a good thing. Okay, yes, but will a lot of sodium ions actually rush into the axon? Not exactly. Yes, some sodium ions go into the axon, but not a lot. So in this case over here, some sodium ions, very few sodium ion channels open, in this case just one. And even though sodium ion rushes into the cell, yes, it starts to become more positive. That is true. The voltage, the membrane potential starts to go up, but it's not able to hit about negative 55 millivolts. Negative 55 millivolts is the threshold potential, or the limit that must be hit before it generates the action potential. If the axon cannot hit negative 55 millivolts, Therefore, it will not be able to generate an action potential at all. So if there's no action potential generated, will it send a signal to your brain? No, it won't. Okay, so that is why a weak stimulus cannot generate an action potential, because the stimulus is not strong enough to reach the threshold potential. Okay, so conversely, imagine if in the case of a strong stimulus, however, now in the strong stimulus, someone taps on your wrist. Now that stimulus is quite strong. In that case, when the strong stimulus happens, see the difference. Earlier, because of the weak stimulus, only one sodium ion channel open, or very few sodium ion channels open. But when someone taps on your wrist, in this case over here, there is a higher amount of sodium ion channels that open. Earlier was 1, but now is 3. So more sodium ions are able to rush into the cell. The membrane potential starts to become more positive, and guess what? As it starts to go up, as more sodium ion rushes into the cell, the axon, it is able to reach the threshold potential. And because it reaches the threshold potential, this is where more sodium ion channels will basically open. And when more sodium ion channels open, more sodium ion rushes in, which causes the membrane to reach positive 30 millivolts and successfully depolarize. And when the membrane successfully depolarizes to positive 30 millivolts, that's when an action potential is generated. And this is when it's able to send the signal all the way, for example, to the brain, and then your brain tells you that, hey, someone is tapping on your wrist. So this is how it works. So this is a good thing, because like I said, you do not want to be able to generate action potentials for everything. So for example, when the tiny little insect is just crawling on your skin, the stimulus is so weak that it depolarizes the membrane slightly, yes, but it's not able to reach the threshold potential. This is good because you do not want to unnecessarily send less important signals to the brain. So, because sending impulses to the brain or to your central nervous system requires a lot of ATP. So the nervous system do not want to commit to it if the stimulus is very weak. So by having something called the threshold potential, our body is able to conserve ATP and only send impulses when necessary.